OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
All right. It is time for us to welcome Stefanie Preissner to the OTB Culture Hall of Fame. Stefanie, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Good morning. I'm getting on grand. I'm trying to remain positive, but my ability to maintain positivity is dwindling fast. So it's 10 a.m. now. I've already baked. I've cleaned windows. I've been up since the crack of dawn, and now I'm annoyed with myself because I've done all of the things that were on my to-do list for the day. So for the rest of the day, I'm just gonna have to wallow in my own sadness and frustration within a 2-kilometer radius from my house.
Of course. People are going to know you from Can't Cope, Won't Cope, which was a brilliant smash hit comedy. As a comedy writer, is this fertile ground for you, this kind of misery and ennui, or is this actually a bit of a disaster? How is your joke making and writing ability coping with the shit show?
I mean, it's not great, and having written a TV show called Can't Cope, Won't Cope, a lot of people find it really funny to message me now being like, and now how are you coping? Will you cope? Won't you cope? And then I just block them and mute them. And I'm like, that is not a funny joke right now. We're past jokes. It's post humor is a new era that we have entered. I'm writing 2 TV shows at the moment, and both of them are meant to be comedies. And it's just not, it's really hard. It's like the sort of global anxiety that is happening is like tinnitus, and I can't drown it out, and I can't make jokes, and it's hard to imagine a time when this will be over and people will joke about normal things again. And I've spent so much of my life and my career talking about how I'm an introvert and how I don't go to parties and how I don't like crowds and I like being on my own with a book. And now I hate all of those things, and I want to be an extrovert, and I want to make jokes about my past self and not being in isolation. And it's just too much, and I don't think that there's any sort of original humor to be made about it. So my career is over, and I'm gonna be a baker.
A lot of people are having that existential crisis at the moment. Is it impossible to work then, given that that is your whole job, or can you block stuff out now, do the dark bits, and hope that the humor comes back, and then layer in the jokes afterwards?
I'm really bad with unexpected. I'm not great with surprises. I've said that through my whole career. I like to have a plan. I like to have a routine. So unexpected viruses are really not great for me, and I think anyone, but particularly I've had a lot of Zoom calls with my producers, and they're in LA, and one thing that is becoming apparent is the different ways in which the Irish government and the American government are dealing with this. And so a lot of our Zoom calls, because now we're in a development phase for the show, and we're trying to drown out the current moment that we're in and look at the particular situational comedy that is in the show, which doesn't include coronavirus times. And constantly our conversations keep coming back to, we could have how would this character be in a lockdown situation? So it's good that we have a lot of time on our hands now, because a lot of time is being spent talking ourselves into and then back out of coronavirus situations. So we've kind of gone into development phases with the shows, which we were in anyway. And it's just kind of going to be a more protracted development, I guess. So, sorry, that is by way of saying I usually can only write for about 4 hours a day in normal times. And because it takes a lot of energy to create something out of nothing. And now I'm kind of only able to concentrate for maybe an hour and a half of writing a day, which is fine because there's no weekends, there is no time really anymore. So if I do an hour and a half, 7 days a week, then I'm sort of coming out with the same amount of content. It's just maybe not as light and funny as it was. Not that light and funny was ever what I was known for. I am kind of a dark comedy, but it's very dark comedy.
Yeah, I can imagine. It feels in a way that this is going to change how people and pop culture represent things in kind of a similar way to the advent of the mobile phone when you look at series from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and like, why don't they just ring him? Or soap operas in particular, why don't they just ring him? Now it's going to be like, well, you can't have that social gathering there. There's no social distancing. Like we're all looking at old pieces of content going, well, you wouldn't get away with that today.
Yeah. And are you finding as well that your brain is like not? It is like it doesn't really remember the old ways. Like I'm doing a jigsaw at the moment because I do a lot of jigsaws now, and the jigsaw that I'm doing is like some very bucolic Derbyshire like park landscape, and all these people are crowded together, and I'm like, oh my god, like why are they not social distancing these characters in my jigsaw? But I've also had like dreams where my dreams have caught up with reality, where people are social distancing and coughing into their elbows in my dreams now. And I wonder, and I know that social distancing will continue long after these heavy restrictions are lifted, but I wonder if like social distancing will kind of always be there. I do believe that like I'm going to be far less fast and loose with just being a casual hugger from now on. Like even once all of this is over, I'm not just going to hug strangers anymore. I didn't always do it anyway, but I think people will be less willy-nilly about how close they let strangers get to them. And I'm wondering, is that going to have implications in scripts from now on? I mean, having everyone keep 2 meters apart, I think will eventually be gone. But, I wonder if, this is something that like, I remember my grandmother who never really got over food rations, like that left from the war, like that stayed with her, and she always had this thing about food and having enough and what were you eating and what was the plan. And I'm wondering what will be the thing that stays in our DNA from this, because if I can predict what that will be, then I can put it into my scripts, but it's kind of hard to know now because it changes so quickly.
Absolutely. It's kind of hard to know how ingrained we become in this way of behaviour as to what sticks and what doesn't. And I think that'll only become clear over the next couple of weeks and months. Stephanie, like, is this a situation where you've become an even bigger fan of comedy at this point? I know that possibly can't be the case given you're an actual writer on the subject, but have you actually found yourself flicking on a lot more comedy as a fan of the entire genre? Is it something that you need to cheer you up? I think for me, it's something that I've certainly turned to a lot more over the last couple of weeks rather than heavy material.
No, actually, I don't
Right.
really enjoy watching television. In the same way that maybe people who work in a restaurant don't particularly enjoy eating out so much. I love reading, and I love Twitter. I think the funniest things are not scripted and are not created in a writer's room. So during this time, I'm really sort of trying to wrap myself in childhood comforts, that sort of amniotic comfort of being back in the womb, like they're eating a lot of porridge and warm soft food and watching cartoons. But one of the things that I have gone back to, there are 2 shows that I go back to time and again, and you can tell how desperate my life is and how stressed I am by what I'm watching. And if I'm going back to things like Friends and the US Office, things are bad. It's Celine Dion, Friends, and the US Office, and that's like the kind of triad of tragedy for me in my life. And I'm watching a lot of the US Office now, and it's really helping me get through.
Well, that's why you're here for us today. Let's get into this because this is the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, and Stefanie is bringing the US Office into it, which is sponsored obviously by Now TV. Stream award-winning dramas such as Game of Thrones and Parks and Recreation, or Curb Your Enthusiasm, or Grey's Anatomy, or Inside Out, Toy Story 4, or Rocket Man and Lion King. Loads of great stuff there. What is it about the US Office that is a warm amniotic fluids blanket bubble for you? Why do you love this so much?
I just don't think that there is another show that is as charming and witty and humorous as the US Office. I think it is miles away from its UK counterpart, and I think it comes from being so character driven. Like the characters are some of the most nuanced that I've ever seen. And it's nearly impossible not to get a laugh when you see the chemistry that the characters have with one another, and how that, and that's quite difficult to do, right? So in comedy there are things there's hard comedy and soft comedy. And hard comedy is your broad strokes, you know, like it's often physical and it's very broad. So, you know, someone falling down the stairs and in a very funny way, faulty towers, that's all kind of like very, it's hard comedy. Anyone will laugh. You don't have to have watched an episode or know the characters to get a laugh, and it's quite easy to do. But soft comedy is really, really hard. But what The Office does is it mixes hard and soft comedy. So you have something that is objectively funny, like, you know, Dwight Schrute setting fire to the office in one of the cold openings. But the soft comedy comes from the fact that we know that Dwight is the fire officer of the building and has time and again been trying to get people to take his role seriously. And so they just do it so well that it's something you can just turn on the TV and enjoy because of the hard comedy, but it's a really nice payoff for people who watch every single week and watch every episode, because the soft comedy little Easter eggs that you get, what you learn through those moments, is a really beautiful payoff for people who are fans of the show. And that's kind of why I love it.
Stephanie, it's interesting that you used the word charming to describe the US Office there, because I think if you watch it chronologically, like I didn't really notice it at the start, but if you go back and actually watch season 1 and season 2, there was a huge change in the character of Michael Scott. Michael Scott in season 1, and I know this because the script is very similar, is an American version of David Brent, who's not charming at all, who is I'm a fan of the Office as well, but I think the American Office just goes a hell of a lot better, and I think it's far more universal because of that, because they actually make Michael Scott a more charming character, take the edges off him completely in season 2. They get rid of the slick back hair, they get rid of some of the lines that kind of are now, they seem a lot more cheeky, even if they are still completely outrageous. And I think that's really important. I think that shift from the writers going into season 2, deciding that no, we're not going to have David Brent anymore, Michael Scott is going to be his own character, is the single biggest reason why it becomes this charming show.
I believe you're correct, and I think it's because it's something to do with the American dream, I think, where Americans Americans tend to have a higher mobility of labor. They will move across the continent for jobs. You very rarely find Americans stuck in jobs that they hate with no fulfillment, because Americans have this, I can be president, I can do whatever I want. And so where the UK office found dismay and despair and lackluster, the Americans had hope. And that central figure of the show, Michael Scott, in some ways, he was so deeply lonely, which is why it was charming. He was so deeply lonely that he attempted to turn the office staff into his ad hoc family, and his job as his kind of raison d'etre. And that sort of hope and, you know, stiff upper lip to when the world is burning around you, I think makes you fall in love with the character. And the more that you look at his arc in the full series, especially kind of in the later 5th seasons, which I think are kind of the best for me, the more it becomes clear that like his arc is balanced between his personal and his professional life and his fulfillment in both of those. And so whenever he comes close to personal fulfillment, this family that he wants, this wife he wants, and settles down, his work dwindles, and his personal fulfillment is jerked away from him when he dives into his work. So like his first breakup that he has with the woman who becomes his wife, indirectly but kind of beautifully leads to the Michael Scott Paper Company, which is this, you know, second company that he sets up. And then when he sets off on his own and tries to rebuild his professional life, his personal life dwindles. So it's just sort of so beautifully timed and pitched around that central character. I think that is why it ran for so many more seasons than the UK one did.
Here's the theory for you. Like, I completely agree with what you're saying on Michael Scott there. My theory is that our love for each character is actually based on their relationship with Michael Scott. That if they have a suspect relationship with Michael Scott, we are ultimately rooting for the guy and we will begin to dislike that character. It's the reason why we all have a soft spot for Dwight come the end of the series, because, you know, his sir, yes, sir attitude to his boss in the room, like not unlike you say there, seeing work as his raison d'etre in life. And Dwight has that same thing, and it's a brilliant relationship. But if you kind of look at all the other characters around the office and you look at, say, Jim's relationship with Michael Scott, I think that Jim is one of the most overrated characters in television, and I think he's actually slightly unlikable at times. And I often wonder, is that because I, as a US Office viewer, am just such a big Michael Scott fan, and Jim and Michael perhaps don't have that same sort of comical relationship?
Yeah, I think anytime a character shows um, is in any way pejorative towards Michael Scott, they go against the viewer, because I think what the mockumentary style of the show does is allows us to see Michael and how earnest and sad and lonely and hopeful he is, and so we are always on his side because we understand fully where everything is coming from, even when he is being racist and, you know, misogynistic. We know that it's because he's trying really, really hard to be liked, or he's just misinformed. So when another character comes in and is overtly awful to him, I think it's why Jan is the villain of the show, because we see how terribly she treats him. And that whole relationship, like when he is in that marriage with her and he has that tiny flat screen TV and she's upstairs making her candles, like,
And the bed at the end of the bed.
Broken. Oh yeah, and he sleeps on the, oh God almighty, give me patience. Like, and I think it's when I think Jim becomes more likable because Pam is so sympathetic towards Michael, and she gives some of that to Jim. Yeah, so I would agree with you on your theory there.
Like, it's something that obviously a lot of us would feel watching it, that we're not quite sure about Jim. Like, I often thought that my sort of dislike for Jim was just because I was really jealous of this good-looking, charming male in the office, and I was like, well, this is just clearly me getting my hump up about this guy. But then BuzzFeed released this article a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if you've seen it, and I'm like, thank you, BuzzFeed, where they do like 17 reasons why Jim Halpert is actually a dick. And that was the moment when I think I was like so self-affirmed in my belief that Jim Halpert's not a good guy. But it's interesting that you think that his relationship with Pam actually is the thing that draws him closer to the viewer.
Yeah, I think it does redeem him eventually. But then, of course, when you look at it with a 2020 lens, there is, and I think particularly a feminist lens, he is an incredibly problematic character in the sense that, like, he doesn't take no for an answer. He kisses a woman who he knows is engaged. He is the bully continuously, and he bullies Dwight. And so he is all of those things that I think were velcroed onto him to give humor and texture. When you look at him as an overall character, he's probably a little bit problematic. But I think it's his relationship with Pam and the love that he shows for her and the beauty of that relationship that I do think redeems him, and how he eventually in the later seasons becomes quite sympathetic to Dwight and allows Dwight to take the lead, and he becomes his assistant or his wingman. That makes us feel really it's like, off, you know, fair play, Jim, because I think we know that in the real world Jim could do anything that he wanted, and he could have gone off and done his sports athlete company, but he gives up those sort of personal ambitions for these people who he has come to love in this workplace.
Can we go back to the US Office versus The Office conversation? The first season is almost frame for frame a copy. It's been a long time since I've watched the two of them kind of in proximity, but from memory, they're very similar. Does the original Office not deserve a lot more credit for actually creating that framework and those characters that ultimately becomes the US Office? It feels to me like
I think that the UK Office ran out of steam because the US office was successful once it took off from the UK office. Once it stopped doing what the UK office was, which was, it was depressing, and it was about these characters who are stuck in a kind of purgatory for years on end, longing for something different but never finding it. And where the American one took that and made it hopeful, we went with them. But there's nothing more depressing than watching depressed people stay in a depressing setting and find it depressing. But it was the hope and the joy that allowed us to go on for 8 seasons or however many there were with the US office. So yeah, I mean, it was a springboard, but it was a really depressing springboard that no one wanted to continue watching. I didn't. But then I also find Ricky Gervais incredibly depressing.
Well, I can see why you would definitely, you know, if you look at these two, if you look at the people behind the two characters, they are very different. Like, I don't think Ricky Gervais is acting that much when he's doing David Brent. I mean, obviously he'll say he is, but like in public, he doesn't. He didn't have to channel too hard. There wasn't too much chiseling away of his own gruff exterior to find David Brent right there. And I can see why. But I remember when that dropped first, it was so out there and different from everything else. And it was such a singular work versus anything that we'd ever seen. Like, bear in mind, this is dropping on the BBC. Like, everybody's watching it. And it felt like a transgression. And I think it deserves extra credit for that maybe when you watch the two of them now, it's kind of like everybody goes, Citizen Kane, such an amazing movie, and you watch it and you go, oh, what the hell? Then you realize that actually this is the first time anybody's done any of this stuff, really. I'm not saying that nobody's ever done mockumentary, but...
And I think, you know, like Now TV have Parks and Recreation on there, which is a huge, which I think is hugely inspired by The Office, because this was one of the first mockumentary style things. I'm just saying that it is not, you know, The Godfather Part 2 is objectively better than The Godfather Part 1, and the US office is objectively better than the UK office, even though its genome and its DNA is entwined with it. But it was and Ricky Gervais continued to be an executive producer. He even features in the US office, so he's not like, you know, sitting in a corner eating moldy bread crying that he lost a good thing. He also recognized that the US office was better than the UK, I think.
Yeah, like
because British people, I don't enjoy British humor. I'm sorry, I don't like the UK office.
It's interesting. I think that might have actually been broke the duck for a lot of people, who would have preferred maybe British humor on certain things. That there's almost like a British sensibility to the early seasons of the US office, which of course they shelve a lot of. But like, I'm with you on this completely, Stephanie. I think it's far superior actually to the original Office. And I think even just by simple fact that you get to season 6 and it is still absolutely hilarious. Fair enough if you think like post Michael Scott it takes a downturn or the final season isn't amazing, which I personally disagree with as well. I don't think you can make any case that even the late Michael Scott seasons aren't some of the best comedy TV we've ever had.
I agree. And I also like comedy television, but also incredibly moving. Like that final scene when Michael Scott comes back at the end of the show, that's one of the most moving scenes that because you've got all these years with these characters, but you're really rooting for Michael, and it is it wasn't just 30 minutes of comedy. It was drama, and it was emotive, and there was an investment in there that I don't care about the characters in the UK office. You know, they're just depressing. It's like that friend who keeps coming to you and being like, "Oh, I'm really unhappy in my relationship." It's like, yeah, but you can only give someone advice and so many times, be like, "Get out of the relationship or stop complaining about it." And that's how I feel about the UK office, which I do not have the same feelings about the US office, because I do feel like that there's this hope, and that, you know, it's all, the US office was always so on point about the ways that people try to distract themselves from how their lives have ended up in a workplace that none of them would have dreamed of turning into a career. And that, yes, did grow from the UK office, but it just went to the stars with the US.
If we had to push you for a favorite character or a favorite scene, Stephanie, what sticks out to you from the entire series?
I I have overall my favorite scenes are always the cold openings. I think they are inspired, and I think two of them I would pick. One is the cold opening where Dwight sets fire to the office to show people that they have not been listening to his fire safety advice, and Stanley ends up having a heart attack. And then the other one is I really love the parkour cold opening as well. And then probably one of my favorite arcs and storylines is what would it be? I like the Dwight Angela relationship.
Really?
Because I feel, yeah, I just like how it plays out, and how Angela is, how unlikely it is, and then how the payoff at the very, very end where they realize that the cameras have been recording kind of secretly and off mic as well, and how all of that payoff from all of those 8 years of that relationship come to fruition.
I'm going to be very self-indulgent here. Just get one question in on Ryan, because he's my favorite character, and I think the relationship between Michael and Ryan, with Michael trying to impress the young temp at the start, is just gold. And I think Ryan's bizarre transformation as a character over the following seasons is hilarious and absurd, and it's perfect. I think he's the perfect character. I don't even think you can put him as like kind of an ancillary character as such, but that's what I would have him down as. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if that is up there with the Dwight and Angela relationship.
I hate Ryan.
Okay.
I hate him as a woman. As a woman, I hate Ryan. But as a character, he's absolute gold. And seeing, so he's our, also like he's our, I think it is inspired how his character progresses, because he is our lens into season 1. You know, the kind of setup is this new guy is, he's the audience. He's coming into this character, he's coming into this world for the first time and trying to make sense of it. So we're on his side, but how quickly we start to love Michael Scott, even though he's being sort of weird to Ryan. And then how Ryan's, you know, how his career trajectory, you know, he ends up like taking the company, his fall from grace, his relationship. But I do think that I don't know, he wouldn't be one of the characters that comes to mind when I think of who my favorite characters in The Office are, because I think he's odious as a human man. Because of how he treats Kelly, because of all of the reasons. Sorry.
And yet he's Owen's favourite. Can I ask you a little bit more about the British comedy? Because I also kind of grew up listening to everybody talk about British comedy and going, is it that good actually? And would generally have found American comedy to be way better. Are you like an Only Fools and Horses fan?
No.
Are there other British comedy series that are like supposed to be sacred cows that you're going, actually, this is rubbish?
No, like I can't find one. Like name some of them. Only Fools and Horses, no. All of those royal families, all that
Keeping Up
sort of,
Appearances.
No, it's just stupid. It's like, that's not funny. See, I think that the funny, my favorite type of comedy is like observational comedy, where it's witty, and it means that the writer is an intelligent person who has observed something in life and can metabolize that and process it and show it back to you. And it's like, oh my God, because comedy is based on shared experience. And I think those sort of, the ones that portray the writer as an observant person are my favorite. So things that are like, watch the pedestrian, Richard. That's not funny. Like, that's not funny. It's not. And like, it's not funny the 12th time she says it. It's not funny that she pronounces bucket, bouquet. I just don't think that is funny. And I think Faulty Towers is funny because I think physical comedy is really incredibly hard to do, and he's a genius. But like, you know, what's the name of the guy in Faulty Towers? The Spanish guy. Manuel. Like, that's not funny. It's actually a little bit racist and problematic.
A lot racist.
But yeah. I can't think of a British thing that I think is funny.
What about like Life of Brian, Blackadder sort of era?
No,
fair enough.
Blessed are the cheesemongers. I just don't get it. But then those things are really successful, and they're broadly funny, so that like even someone who doesn't buy a newspaper finds them funny. And that's not the kind of comedy that I create or that I enjoy. And there's loads of people to do that, so I don't have to enjoy it. It's not for me.
No, but I think it's okay to actually say that this is bland. It's like unseasoned food for everybody that you mass produce and you shove out there. And it was the only thing that was on TV for decades and decades and decades. And it somehow, a lot of people who weren't very talented became household names on the back of it. You're like, really, is that the high watermark of TV? There's been a revolution in TV in the last 15, 20 years that has been brilliant for us as consumers to watch. What are you watching apart from these stuff? Like, are there TV series at the moment that you're actually getting into outside of, I know you said earlier on you don't really enjoy watching TV, apart from comedy? Can you watch drama and go, okay, I can decompress and just watch this? Or are you still watching that going, ooh, that's well written, well drawn characters?
I don't see, if I'm thinking well written, well drawn characters, then I'm in work mode and I'm not enjoying the thing. But there are TV shows that I have to watch for work that I find incredibly well made and I enjoy, or there are aspects of them that I'm watching for a reason, and so other people might enjoy them. Like I had to watch last week for work Enlightened and Dead to Me. Enlightened is a HBO series about Laura Dern, who has like anger management issues where she works, but her ex-husband is her boss, and she has this big blowout and she has to go to Hawaii to like meditate and like get calm, and then she comes back, and it's about how difficult it is for her to bring that sort of enlightened version of herself back into the American workforce, which is interesting. And then Dead to Me is about these two widows who meet each other at the start of the season at a support group, and how their relationship develops and the twists and turns around her husband's death. So I enjoyed those two, but for the most part, like once I'm finished watching Tony Houlihan in the evenings, I don't want to like also have to take out my notebook and pen and watch something that my brain is going to start picking apart. So that's why I'm watching Moana and The Lion King.
Well, the Lion King is great. It's got some amazing lines. The shallow end of the gene pool is one that I've been stealing a lot. You can always steal from the classics. If you're going to steal, you may as well steal from the ones that have lasted. Is there anything, Owen, this is like literally your favorite topic. This is the show that you've been looking forward to doing the most. Is there anything else that you'd like to ask now that you have the floor here for us to all be talking about your favorite TV show of all time?
Well, I think like you basically affirmed my opinion that this is light years ahead of the UK office. So I'm very, very happy with that. Not happy that my love of Ryan has pointed me out to not be a great person, but I'm fine with that. Like I can live with that. And like the final thing that I almost take away from this is like when you talk about the relationships, because at the start you mentioned how charming it is and the chemistry that exists between certain characters. I would contend that the chemistry that exists between Pam Beesly and Dwight Schrute is fantastic writing and is perfection. Like two people that should not get along but do get along, and I love that. I actually would say I love that relationship in the show.
Yes, and I think it's a slow burn, and the payoff, when Dwight is really upset about Angela and Pam is, I think it's, you could take that storyline and put it into any drama or romantic comedy or tragedy, and it would play out because it's so well pitched and so beautifully seeded along the way. It's inspired, and that's incredibly difficult to do over that many seasons with that many writers. And I think it stands and it speaks to the showrunner and the executive producers, who obviously had sort of a vision for their characters throughout. Have you been watching on Twitter where people say how the US office version of the coronavirus pandemic? It's how I love how people on the internet who are really fans of the show can predict how the US office would have done this real life situation. And I like the details about like Creed definitely somehow is like patient zero.
Yes.
And it's just fascinating. And I think because people can, the fact that people can predict how the characters would react, and everyone is like, oh my God, yes, speaks to how nuanced and how well formed the characters are.
That's a good point.
I had one last question that I wanted to ask you about. You were tweeting us about your underage swimming career. What happened? What happened? The great, amazing swimmer who turns into a comedy writer. Why did you turn your back on the pool?
Guys, there was some doping. No, there wasn't. Training was at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and at a certain age, I was like, I also got really bored of the fact that there were 4 strokes, and I was only really good at 2 of them. And swimming up and down a 25-meter pool for the rest of my life with only 2 options of what stroke to choose, like, it just wasn't the life I was born to live. So I hung up my goggles and I walked away from that life, and you can't force me back there.
Do you still enjoy swimming as a matter of interest, or did that kill your love of it?
No, like, it's too boring. Even the smell of the pool brings me back to it. And it's a really lonely sport because it's not a team sport. So when you lose by yourself, and you're constantly in competition with yourself. So trying to get, and I'm talking milliseconds, trying to knock milliseconds off your time to be a millisecond better than you were once, it's kind of soul destroying. And I mean that quite seriously. It makes you have a very strange relationship with yourself, where you can be a failure because you are a couple of milliseconds slower than you were, which can be for any number of reasons. And it just was a little bit like, for my mental health, I can't anymore. And I don't swim anymore because I can't forget my old times. And there's always part of you that's looking at that clock on the wall.
What age did you give it up?
17.
Okay, so you went really late, really far. Like, and how good were you at that stage? Like,
yeah, like, I was pretty good and I was pretty serious. I have a lot of medals and I have a lot of emotional scars. But yeah, I didn't. And for a while I toyed with joining a master's team when I went to college, but it's just not something that I'm up for. I still have the square shoulders though, so they're never gonna go.
Well, that's good, right? It's a good thing, and the athleticism that comes from it. Like, yeah, okay, right. Well, that was a kind of depressing end to a chat about a show that wasn't supposed to be. I'm sorry about that. Stefanie, you've been great. Thanks a million. I hope you enjoyed that chat. And look, I was definitely a fan of the original, and I'm still a fan of the original, but I totally am starting to tune in and buy the point, and maybe I need to go back and revisit a couple of the later seasons as well. So this week in the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, Stefanie has put in the US office, and I think we can all accept that it absolutely deserves its place there. You can stream the original office on Now TV. You can also stream Enlightened, as was mentioned, and of course Parks and Recreation. They have loads of great stuff on Now TV. Curb Your Enthusiasm, Inside Out, Toy Story 4, Grey's Anatomy, Rocketman, and Lion King. That is this week's OTB Culture Hall of Fame. Stefanie, thanks a million, and best of luck with everything that's coming next.
Thank you so much. It was lovely chatting to you. See you soon.
The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.